I want to shift a little bit into workflows. I mean, a lot of this is bringing in more personas into the data and analytics conversation. Um, and Prakalpa, maybe you can touch on this. Like, we talk a lot about changing the workflows of data and analytics teams, but it seems like in a data mesh implementation, we would almost be talking about how do our operational teams change what they do to facilitate the analytics downstream or make it more of this symbiotic relationship? Like how does a RevOps person think about how they go about building their processes to align better to how we may want to analyze that process downstream? Um, so I guess how are we impacting producers and consumers with data mesh?
Yeah, I would actually not everyone's thoughts on this, but I think something I think about a lot is if you think about the notion of a product in like a real life versus like a services engagement, right? Like fundamentally a product is reusable, it's reproducible, but most importantly, it's adoption focused. Like a product team cares about like the metrics of adoption versus a services team, like it's just, I'm done. Like, I've shipped it out, I'm done. I've shipped this analytics project, I'm done. And like, it's about how quickly you ship versus like whether someone uses it or not. Um, the thing that I think a lot about is that, then, okay, how do you help data producers like build reusable, reproducible data products in the developer workflow? And then how do you create abstraction layers for data consumers? Like what is a product and how do you create an abstraction layer? How do you create a measurement on, is it really a product or is it really reusable? This is like that. Something I've seen is that, however, all this stops at still data people today in real life. So it's it's how a data analyst or a data engineer or a analytics engineer is shipping data. So it's still the starting point still tends to be raw data that we've pulled from source systems, largely in real life implementations, and the process after that, which it feels like with better tooling, Jamak, you were talking about data developer workflows, like we can get to a decent version of what data mesh should look like. The question I don't fully have an answer to is like, will this ever really extend? Like extend back to the engineer who's shipping code for product or the DevOps person who's making a change to Salesforce? Like, are they actually shipping? Are they actually ever going to ship data products? Or, actually, that's actually the wrong balance, right? I don't fully have a point of view. My point of view is maybe we should just start it with data workflow today, where there's going to be massive change. But I'm curious what everyone's thoughts on this is.
Teresa, I don't know if you want to weigh. Prakalpa, I hear what you're saying too. Is the data and analytics team still picking up where some other completely separate software development team left off? Or does that start to merge into, we don't have software teams and operational teams and then data and analytics teams. We just have data product teams that includes the application, the use of the application. Maybe that's not the right word, but uh, you know,
Yeah,
I come back to this producer consumer relationship in data.
I found applying the same concepts to the operational data is helpful, right? The notion of data products leaning into that there's a owner of that that's going to certify from a business perspective, right? They're not necessarily the data geeks, right? But they're the right owner of the business process to certify this is the data that's collected as part of that part of the business process. And then this is the data that's required for that job to be done. And that could come from an operational system or an analytics system and how those need to work together. I think another hard part would be around these organizational silos. So sometimes that source aligned product is needed for an aggregate or consumption aligned product downstream. How do you get these teams to work together? And I find again, that's why I was voting that the people part was actually harder. That change oftentimes requires a change in the organization with top down sort of leadership.
And Barb, maybe you can speak to this, especially. I mean, I think a lot of the incentive for a producer to be more involved in the analytics world is often creating transparency into what happens downstream. And I think this is where observability comes into play a lot of times, just the ability to show. Um, what is happening in your data pipeline. Curious your thoughts on this, the producer consumer relationship there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm certainly biased with my opinions here, but yeah, I think that's sort of a core problem that we think a lot about at Monte Carlo, and oftentimes we find that that sort of disjointed view between the producer and the consumer is actually what results in a lot of things actually not working well and the lack of adoption of data across organizations. And so facilitating ways for those teams to not only have visibility into what other teams are doing, but also to be able to communicate about those or what are the most important things. So, just thinking about like real life implementations or initiatives to try to implement data mesh, a couple of teams that come to mind, like Roche, for example, Best Egg, which I think is also a DBT and an Atlan customer as well. One of the most important things that they've done to try to implement data mesh is actually think about what are those things that help or different parts of the organization speak to each other, if you will. What are the SLAs that you need to define? And actually, what's the role of like observability and security and scalability as those teams work together? So 100%, I agree with you, Prakalpa. I think, as you sort of look to the future, I do think we'll adopt concepts from engineering, right? We talked about like microservices and sort of those shift. I think in a similar way, we'll see a lot of kind of a move to support data products and where there are sort of data teams that have end-to-end ownership of that particular data product. And I think we're seeing more and more teams gravitate towards that versus having, very specialized teams in different areas that own different parts. And I think that, obviously with the rise of kind of the analytics engineering role, it's become more and more important to define what that means.